Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Brett Ackerman, the Chief Operating Officer of Composable. Thanks for joining us today. Today, I'm excited to talk to you about really the future of business. And with the ever-changing landscape with AI, it's harder than ever for businesses to figure out where to start and how to manage that landscape. And so we're going to be having a conversation with Ramesh Dontha and Grant Spradlin to get their opinion on how organizations can really set themselves up for success in managing the enterprise. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Brett.
Ramesh, let's start with you. I'll give you a little background, who you are, what you do.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. Ramesh Dontha. I'm a podcast host of the podcast Unlocking the AI Advantage. I'm an angel investor operating in the space of AI and health tech. And then we publish a newsletter in the AI area called AI Entrepreneurs, primarily operating in the startup ecosystem.
Thanks, Russ. It's great to have you. And Grant Spradlin.
Thanks, Brett. I'm Grant Spradlin. I'm the VP of Product at Composable, and that's an end-to-end software platform for creating GenAI solutions. It's a pleasure to be here today and share some of the insights and trends in technologies that we're seeing out in the market and what's making GenAI projects most successful.
Great. Thanks, Grant. So I'll open up this question. Either one of you can really start first. But so, AI has been a hot topic for a number of years now, especially generative AI. What are some of the new trends that you're seeing with AI and LLMs, and what do you see coming down the horizons for enterprises, and how do we make sure enterprises are ready for all of those changes that continuing to happen every single day with new models, new software, and new use cases? Where do they start?
I'm happy to kick it off. So I think one of the first trends that we're seeing is that a lot of the interest in generative AI started with ChatGPT, and we're seeing more and more organizations understanding that generative AI is based on large language models, and it goes much further beyond chat and the chat interface. So we're seeing an evolution of going from chat to through package apps. I think people are also have experienced AI through their package applications. And now the trend is leaning towards more custom GenAI solutions. So we actually just published some research just the other week that was in partnership with CMS Wire and Vector.com. And that found that 85% of organizations are adopting custom GenAI solutions. So more than half of enterprise organizations out there have a custom GenAI solution that's already in progress, with 30% already having a custom GenAI solution in production. So what's happening here is we're evolving from chat and through AI and package apps into more custom and differentiating solutions that are specific to the organization. And as organizations are getting into production, they're getting those first learnings, right? They're really getting more solid footing, understanding some of the guardrails, things they need to look out for. They've built some infrastructure, right? There's some lessons learned, and all of that initial development has largely followed programmatic delivery. That was another thing that was found in our research, and that's because in these initial projects, organizations are looking to have tight control and monitor those projects and ensure as much consistency as possible. So I think another trend that we're going to be seeing as organizations realize the value of these custom solutions and they get past the first and they start working on the second and the third is that there's also going to be more of a shift away from that programmatic delivery. And once the infrastructure is set up and established and the patterns and the practices, and we'll see more decentralized or departmental driven AI projects.
Great, Grant. Actually, that's a great start. So, Brett, to answer your question, if you look at the evolution of AI in the last 3 years, especially, right? So just the explosion of AI, right? Initially, we said, hey, there are tools out there, right? You can take this tool and then do something with it. And then afterwards, then GPTs came, and there's a definite generic GPTs were out there, but people could only do so many things with generic GPTs. And also there's a concern about the data itself, enterprises especially, going out of their enterprises. So then it led to the custom GPTs. Okay, so then people started playing with GPTs and then having their own custom GPT. And then the age of agents has come, right? So where now we are talking about, it's more a recent phenomenon of agents, multi-agent kind of a models. So, but if you look at it from enterprise perspective, what does it mean, right? Somebody is trying to deploy AI, then they need a stable infrastructure or foundation somewhere for them to build off of. But enterprises, as we know, are not monolithic, right? It's not like a one size fits all. And depending on the department in the organization, each one will have their own requirements. So now we are seeing the evolution of enterprises having to craft their own specific solution for either the department, the domain that they are organized, that they want to deploy. So now that led to how do I customize these solutions, this foundation that's out there, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's provided by LLM or whatever. So those things are leading in 2024 for enterprises to start customizing the solutions to the requirements. That's definitely a trend. But again, these are all tools, to GPTs, to agents kind of evolution that happened. And in between, whether we're talking about different models that are there, the fascination or the fixation of, oh, this model fits best for this, I think has gone away now. Its model is probably become secondary to, hey, first let's clean up the data, let's focus on the data, right? So the data which should have been the case from the beginning, but now has become the forefront of the deployments.
Yeah, and I think we'll spend some time digging into the models. I think there's a lot of focus on models, and I agree that it's going to continue to evolve, and it's going to continue to just get better and better. But you mentioned, I think, that it's really important to double click on, which is, companies are looking to scale, right? They're trying to figure out how to repeat the solutions. Ramesh, for you, how should organizations be thinking about doing that in a way that allows them to promote AI without it being just AI proliferation everywhere without control? How do they find that balance between rolling out AI for departmental and enterprise solutions without it becoming, for lack of better words, spaghetti AI?
Correct. Yeah, I think that is the challenge with any technology that evolves, right? Especially with the AI, that has been much more so, because the fascination with AI is, it's everywhere across the board. So, and then within enterprises, there is this concern that if you're trying to, make it tops down, then it takes time to lay the infrastructure foundation, the governance and policies and all that stuff. By the time, there is not enough time to do that, right? So the best practices from what I have seen is that starting small, starting with more realizable use case, and then and every organization will have evangelists, like people who really want to get front, right? So starting with that team of evangelists, and starting with a use case that is more realizable, and then quickly, whatever the best practices that emerge out of it with respect to data, with respect to how to deploy an AI solution into production, right? And then people realize that one of the best ways to do it is lay the foundation, but have some kind of an API method to access, whether it's data or the technology, in this case the models, for the specific application. I think that people are realizing that is probably the best way to scale in a long term, taking that approach.
Makes sense. And from an ROI perspective too, so you look at a platform, you look about the scaling, starting small. Any guidance to organizations, Grant, would you think about in terms of how to think about ROI, how to go from that pilot to production, and how organizations can really track that ROI progression?
Yeah, so I think, first off, I couldn't agree more with Ramesh in terms of the general approach, in terms of identifying, tangible use cases that you can measure results. and that you can achieve those results. Because if you can't measure the results, you're certainly not going to measure the ROI. So certainly you need to have a process for prioritizing use cases, ideally by value and by effort. And you need to have methods set up to to measure each of those use cases to make sure that you're seeing the value come through in your solutions. So like Ramesh mentioned, and you were asking Brett about kind of spaghetti solutions, right? Thinking about how you're going to do more than just the first use case, how you're going to scale to N+1 or N+100 use cases, right? Then you really need to start thinking about how you're going to also improve your ROI by reducing your investment, right? You don't want to reinvent the wheel for every use case and for every solution. You want to have a solid foundation from which you can build these solutions and expand into all different types of use cases and even across departments.
Yeah, I think that's a really important part, which is that your ROI is really based on two things, right? Which that expected return and how much does it cost to actually do that return. And I think organizations really need to think about how do you move both those levers, and there's different strategies for both of those things. So I'm going to kind of go down this kind of best practices path a little bit further and pick your brains. So, Ramesh, you talked about kind of API first platforms and how we think about those. Talk about how they can really support the models, right? So as models continue to progress, as you need to think about how you move from not just a model, but to a business process, how do you think about integrating an AI platform with models, with processes and workflows and content in a coherent way?
Yeah. So, I mean, if we go back and look at multiple instantiations of a technology implementation, right? So it's surprising, the best practices are best practices for a reason, right? So it's not that we are reinventing best practices just for AI in this case, whether it's an ERP in the past, whether it's CRM, there are lots of vendors were supplying lots of solutions at that time. And then what did enterprises do? They realized that one of the best ways to kick tires and figure out what's best for them is having an API approach. Okay. And in this case, it's a much faster evolving in this space. And like we were talking about, not even days, hours, right? So where things are coming and then employees are learning and enterprises have to learn. So how would you approach this situation, and knowing that each company's requirements are different, different across the board, right? So in that case, then somewhere you need to standardize, right? So you need to standardize your own infrastructure, right? That's something that you have in control, whether you're doing a hybrid, whether you're doing a cloud only, or whatever that is, that infrastructure that you want to solidify. And then you have some kind of a middle layer, right? So some kind of a middle layer, and then that provides access to the foundation. The foundation could be models, could be the cloud that you are doing, whether Azure, whether it's a Google, whatever that is, right? So it provides the access, the middle layer provides. And then now you can go and then start at the application layer, each one, whether you want to do a finance application, whether you want to do the customer experience application or whatever, then that way the data itself can be cleaned independent of the application, right? Because now you're coming through some middle layer. And then if your data is whatever data that is ready for you, like for example, something is cleaned and governed in the sales side, then you go and take that application. And so, that is the approach that I would say is the best, is compartmentalize each of these layers and then customize the application through an API interface to the ones that you could deploy first.
That's great. Anything to add, Grant?
Yeah, I think that there's, from my perspective, there's two best practices that are really essential for when it comes to ensuring flexibility and scalability. So Gartner actually has a free webinar that they did just a couple months back, which is called the 10 Best Practices to Scale Generative AI Across the Enterprise. And they talk about things like responsible AI and doing pilots and things like this. But when it comes to the topics that you just mentioned about flexibility and scalability, right? There's really two key best practices. One is that you want to have a composable platform architecture, meaning that you want to have a platform for building GenAI solutions. You don't want to have that disintegrated stack or that disaggregated stack, because that's how you end up with the spaghetti that you mentioned earlier. So having a platform really provides the most flexibility. And then, also the second best practice that they mentioned is about taking a product approach, right? The technology is moving so fast, right? That the technology necessitates a product approach to be able to be more agile and adapt to those technology changes, right? So I think that's the second part that's really important about maintaining flexibility to adapt to the tech changes and kind of the ecosystem around us.
And I think also when you talk about kind of having a platform approach, composability, it also kind of brings together reuse, right? So for organizations, going back to ROI, where if I have something that is reusable, I'm reducing that cost, right? And then I'm continuing to build on the actual return side of the house, which sounds like it'd be one of the things that's super important for organizations looking to go beyond the departmental AI, right? And have consistency at that AI layer as well.
Yeah, no doubt that's an enabler of the scalability. Exactly.
No, that's great. And so, you mentioned the technology. I think technology is important. I think a process is important. There's so much going on out there, and I think I probably get, I don't know how many Google alerts every single day about the new best model and large language models and small language models. And, you said custom GPTs versus public GPTs. It's really overwhelming, right? I mean, if you actually go on to look at one of the inference providers, hundreds of models, super hard to choose and evaluate. How should companies think about that? And is there a way that they should do it consistently, or does it change? What's the framework they should think about of choosing the right model?
Yeah, I think the realization, as we discussed, as I believe it's Grant mentioned, which is that it's a model agnostic that is definitely is becoming more prevalent. With respect to your question about how should companies go about in this state of overwhelming technology announcements, it's not an easy question to answer, by the way. So there is no solution that I'm going to offer and say, oh, this is the way to do it. But I think here, the way I would say that the companies that I consult with is that first thing is trying to do a tops down model. Okay, we will dictate how it's going to be. We'll put a policy framework. Probably is very difficult because within the organization there are teams, departments, divisions are already doing it. So first recognize it, right? So and then probably the education, just make sure that people learn and then get up to speed. So as much as they can, that's important. And then the thing though is that, but somewhere you want either the policy framework or a governance, the old model of the people process technology, I think works very, very well in this case, to put some structure around the AI deployments as well. So the people we talked about, educate them and give them access, tools that they can do. But as Grant mentioned, have a programmatic approach, right? Instill the process approach to deploying it, not just like for lack of a better word, the cowboy approach. Somebody wants to go and do that and then deploy it, right? Instead, take the programmatic process approach. Otherwise, you'll have chaos in the organization, right? And then, but you should have some technology that's accessible and available, as a playground for people to play with. And so that way, this whole best model discussion, it's become secondary to rapid experimentation, and then some rapid way to get into a POC mode and pilot mode. You enable that culture in the organization is probably the best way to deal with this this technology announcement that are happening. Otherwise, trying to say, hey, no, we will first process and streamline these models and then technology, only then you can use it. I don't think that will work.
Yeah, I think maybe I can add a little bit too, because I mentioned before about Gartner recommends this composable platform approach. I should emphasize more, what that means. What they mean by that is they mean that you want to decouple the models from your engineering tools.
Yeah.
Right. And that's because it's not about picking the best model, right? I think in maybe a year ago, that was kind of like the big suggestion is, hey, pick a model. Start by picking a model and then build around the model. Now the paradigm is completely flipped on its head. And that approach was based on the lack of having tools to use multiple models. Now that there are tools and platforms where you can use and evaluate multiple models, it's not about starting with the best model. It's about starting with the best use case and what's the right opportunity to drive productivity and efficiency in your organization, right? The platforms and the tools can offer access to hundreds of models. You can even use an AI model to act as a judge. So they call LLM as a judge. So you can use a model to help you evaluate models, for example, against different tasks. So I think the key thing there is that yes, you can pick a model, but start with, in most cases, you're going to start with a large language model, and you're gonna tune and you're gonna optimize costs from there, because it's where people are spending so much time building the solutions. It's not on the model, right? It's on building the infrastructure, prepping the data, getting a solution end to end, and that's where people need to focus their time and their effort.
Yeah, and I think it's really easy to get bogged down on picking the model, right? Because new one's out every single day. So the one that you picked yesterday is not the one that you need tomorrow. And oftentimes, to your point around picking the right use case up front, Grant, it's very quick to evaluate whether or not it's a good use case, right? Can you get to that 60, 70%, 80%? And then you can look at the model. One of the other things I was talking to someone this past week was around concern around generic models versus custom context and domain specific models, right? So how should, there's all this stuff out there, but how should companies really be thinking about ensuring that models have that domain specific models, right? Do they think about fine tuning, building their own model? Do they think about RAG? What kind of approaches would you recommend to companies trying to make sure that the models know who they are and know what their business does?
Yeah. So I think, like I mentioned before, in most cases, most models are going to be able to do most tasks. When we're talking about foundation models, right? Foundation models are trained on billions of pieces of information, and most of the foundation models are trained on similar data, right? So there might be some differences in the things that they're trained on. There might be some differences in cost, speed and latency, things like that. But some of the key differences are the technical limitations, like how much data can you give to the model at once, and then you get into kind of other constraints around, like you mentioned, about kind of domain knowledge, like was it trained with a specific language, right? And that could be a dialect, or it could be a programming language. And then when you get even further and you're talking about domain models, right? Is there a model, or is there some explicit expertise or expert knowledge that's needed to train the model, right? So in some cases, many foundation models have expert level knowledge, right? So even when you're talking about that, a foundation model still might be good enough. So I would say, always start with the foundation model and then evaluate from there whether or not additional fine tuning is needed to incorporate the expert knowledge when you can't supply that through prompts and other techniques. And then from there, maybe you need to even look at a really purpose-built domain-specific model. But in that case, you're going to have a very specific industry, a very specific problem. Generally, it's because you need to train the model with data that's not publicly available.
Yeah, actually, so add to Grant's points, a very valid point. I mean, if we look at, we are in this fortunate situation, right, with AI, with these companies having spent billions of dollars building the foundation models, right? So with the trillions of parameters and all that stuff that is there, so they give us a head start with respect to customizing what's specific to each company. So now that you have that foundation model access, if you look at any application, majority of the time you would be spending time trying to integrate your workflow into whatever that is. Number one. Number two, so you get the benefit of the productivity. Number two is that looking at your own data set, right? So depending on the quality of the data set that you have, and then the maturity of the data that you have, right? Customizing the applications, or for example, if your data set is really not high quality, you need to work on improving the quality of the data, then you probably at a different phase of AI implementation than somebody whose data set is high quality, right? So that's why this having a custom approach gives each company the opportunity to fine tune the applications, the AI applications specific to their own situation of the data readiness, their own infrastructure readiness, and the people readiness in terms of how comfortable are people, how many evangelists that they can really go and do it, as opposed to trying to force fit. Hey, some other company is so much ahead. It's not possible to take that culture and then take that into your own environment. In this, that's why we are very lucky that we have set up the foundation models that give us a head start, legs to, and then instead of trying to focus on which of those models is the best for them, start somewhere and then start customizing.
So on that same note, do I think we were talking about data and content fundamentally, right? Like content, LLMs eat content, right? That's what they use. How much, how should companies be thinking about that data readiness and that content for that? Should they take a similar approach where start with what they have, iterate, and evolve, or do they need to spend time to groom that data and that content before they can really start validating those use cases?
I myself, I'm very biased towards the governance approach, data governance approach, which is that unfortunately, if you go back and look at companies that have failed, whether it's any other technology implementation or even the AI implementation, you would find, I remember one of the research reports where 70% of these failures are attributed to data, right? So given that, can we learn something from that research, and then actually focus on the data itself, right? So I'm very, very biased towards use cases first, definitely, there's no doubt about that, and prioritizing the use cases. And then once you have done that, whatever the data set that is there, focusing the quality of the data, in my opinion, is more important than focusing on the model, because there may be use cases that do not require AI at all, right? That might require just a standard, similar, very simple rule-based application, and then but for that you need to have a data that's ready.
Yeah, and I just to add to that, from what Ramesh said, I mentioned at the beginning that we recently did some research at Composable. We published a white paper just last week about that. And, one of the findings from that is just how much time people are spending on prepping the data. Mm-hmm. So, if it takes 6 months to get a custom GenAI solution into production, the reality is they're spending half of that time on the data, on preparing the data. Because if you don't prepare the data appropriately, and you're not giving it the right business data, you're not going to get the right business result. You're not going to get the right output from the model. So certainly the data preparation is an essential part to getting in realizing the value that you're intending to get.
But it sounds like that's also still part of the broader platform, right? So it's the data prep, and you want the reusability, right? Because I assume.
Correct.
Yeah. I guess back to your original question, for me, it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg type problem, where, you need to know about the use cases in order to better understand how to prep the data and inform the data. So if you don't know how your use cases are, then you're definitely not going to know how to prep your data. And even once you know how the use cases are, you might want to do some experimentation and some spikes, some POCs, just to validate how the data will be used to better inform the preparation. So I see those things going hand in hand, and one can help inform the other for sure.
And I would imagine, I think, Ramesh, you said that, I think this is 100% true. Software is software, right? The best practices are best practices. It happens to be AI. And when you think about use cases, oftentimes you look at a use case or a user story, you need to figure out what are the requirements underneath that? What do I need to actually solve that? So it sounds like even when you start with those use cases, that use case you first identify, you might actually decompose it into multiple pieces based on the data you have available and then build it iteratively, right? So, is that how companies should be thinking about that? Or should they look at it as here's my use case, I need the full thing end to end? Or should they break it into pieces and do it more iteratively, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the iterative approach, again, from my experience, is better. It's the same thing that the agile methodology we talked about, right? So in 2000, we said agile exploded the software development. And the reason why it's an iterative approach, right? Which is that, hey, you learn something, especially when technology is exploding the way it is right now. Then the iterative approach is the best way to do. So first take the use case, and then also look at the research of which use cases have had more success with AI, right? So as opposed to trying to tackle a use case that has not been tackled before, you may be a genius that you could tackle it, but if you look at the customer experiences, right? So, I mean, even though we could, laugh at chatbots and all that stuff, there's a reason why they were the first ones to be implemented, because the use case was well understood. Okay. And there were lots of building blocks that are available to implement that. Okay. And then once you do that, then you will learn. But once you going back to your question, Brett, which is very insightful question, which is that once you take that use case of like a complete, let's say, workflow of a external customer engagement, but you peel that into a small one as a chatbot. Like when they come to my website, only do that particular use case, then make it intelligent, right? Make it, if you can recognize the person who's asking the question, and if you have data about that person who's asking, from a retail customer, then I can ask intelligent questions. Hey, last time you bought a medium, shirt. I mean, that's what I get. And then, so that immediately that more realizable, so that particular use case can be implemented in with the AI, with a more intelligent. I mean, then you learn from that and you go to the next layer of the use case. So the iterative approach, I think it's proven with the software development, software deployment, and in this case, the AI implementation, I think it works best.
And Grant, what are you seeing when you're talking to organizations? I think, if you look at those, Ramesh said it earlier, which is sometimes use cases aren't generative AI or not AI at all, right? It might be just business rules. How do you help organizations think about what is generative AI when you take a look at that use case and that process and you break it into pieces? I'm assuming that it's not going to be solved by one tool. It could be solved by lots of tools, kind of in an ecosystem type play. How do you help companies figure out, what's the right fit for generative AI and a platform approach?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely need to make sure that businesses are using the right tools for the right job. It's like the old hammer and nail analogy. AI is so prevalent now. Sometimes people will say that AI is going to solve every problem, or AI is the tool to solve every problem, and it's not. So I think again, grounding it in not necessarily what are the use cases for AI, but what are our top priorities and top use cases where we could drive efficiency, reduce cost, right? Find some ROI, and then find how AI is going to support that, right? AI doesn't need to be the tip of the spear and everything's about AI. But when you identify that, you can automate or augment some business process with AI. Once you recognize that part and it is an appropriate tool for that problem, certainly you need tools to manage the solution and adapt to the change over time. So like we talked about, you don't want to hyperfixate on the models. We know the models will change. I think most organizations have learned that by now. So it's the best to decouple applications from models, like I was talking about with a platform approach. I mentioned that's Gartner's recommendation. IDC is another analyst firm that also recommends LLM software platforms really for the same reason. It's to abstract the complexity of GenAI outside of the solutions, right? And being able to experiment, build, and deploy and manage these solutions more broadly. So, those are tools that can help you once you find that that's a use case, you think AI is the right scenario, right, or the right tool for the job. These tools can really help with that experimentation and validation to ensure that you're going down the right path before you put in a big investment, right? To Ramesh's point, the last thing that you want to do is be doing, big bang waterfall with AI these days. So you want to take an iterative approach and validate and justify as you progress. And really, these generative AI platforms provide the most flexibility and efficiency to do that.
So let's dig into what we mean by platform a little bit, right? Because platform can get thrown around there a lot. I mean, a lot of different things to a lot of people. The technology is going to continue to shift, right? We talked about model abstraction and new models and having that separation between the middle layer and orchestration. But how should companies evaluate or think about new AI technologies, and how does a platform fit into that? I guess let me ask it a slightly different way or add on to that, which is, let's say there's a new AI service that comes out that looks really interesting, and I want to integrate that into my AI platform. Is that a service that I connect to? Is that part of the AI platform? Like, how modular do organizations need to think about this platform type approach, and how do they evaluate new services and technologies to integrate into it?
Yeah, Ramesh, you want to start off there?
Yeah, so let me take this. If we look at if the last 10 years, right? So even the AI exploded before that, right? So there was this whole data lake concept that really came around a few years ago, all right? So where data warehouse, data lakes, lots of things were thrown around, right? So, and the reason, if you go back and see why that was the case, right? That's the same situation. Different vendors have come out with structured data, unstructured data, right? So all that stuff, how do we use this? And then we said we'd throw them into this data lake concept that is there and then access it, right? And the reason I would want to use similar analogy here, which is to the question of the platform approach, right? So Brett, I think a really good point that you're making. The platform is a very generic term that it could mean different things to different people. I'll give you my own definition of what is a platform, right? I go back to this old model of the 7-layer, where is the middle layer, application layer, and all that stuff, right? So each of the layer has its own modules that you can plug and play into, right? So for me, an infrastructure, the platform at the infrastructure level, right, has it might have like a different cloud vendor provider plugins, right? And then, so similarly for me, the platform here is that I might have one model, model A, model B, model C. Then to your question about a model D came, which is new, you throw it in there like it's in a playground kind of concept or a sandbox, right? Now, because you've already modularized, you're going in this direction of implementing your applications in a modular, so-called platform approach. So then that is abstracted, the model D that came new, right? That's abstracted, and then you have an access to the model D if you want through this modular approach that you've selected to implement. Then you could see how it performs very quickly compared to your ABC kind of a thing. So that is the way I look at this platform approach, and hope that makes sense.
Yeah, if when I think about the platform, generally a platform is a suite of tools that, does all different types of functions. And when I think about GenAI solutions, the some of the common things that we see across, all different types of GenAI solutions, regardless of the department or the industry, is that, you're going to have AI models, right? So that becomes, in my mind, one part of the platform is, model access and model management. And models don't just do things on their own. Like, you have to tell them, you have to give them instruction, right, through a prompt. So then you have things of how do you manage prompts, right? How do you centralize prompts, share prompts, govern changes to prompts, things like that. How do you experiment? How do you bring these things together? How do you bring together the prompts and the models to then create services, right, that are specific to different solutions? So you need something also to create your service layer, right, to create that API that Ramesh mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. Also, that's just kind of like getting something up and running, right? Once you have something running and it's in production, you got to observe it, right? You got to be able to know, who ran what, where, what did the LLM or the AI say, who consumed that information. You need a full audit trail and control over that, especially in a big organization, to make sure that AI is being used responsibly, right, within the organization, and that also that the models aren't regressing, or that they're not going off the path from what you originally validated. So you need to make sure that your services continue to give the same quality of responses, because models aren't deterministic. They're non-deterministic. So you need to monitor them and make sure that they continue to provide the value that they did initially. So those are some of the areas that come to mind, in terms of like pieces that you'll see across platforms and solutions.
So Brett, if I can add to that, let's take this example, right? So for example, so today, a company wants to deploy AI and they've selected a model, an approach, and then, but as Grant said, you need prompts, right? So you send some prompts, you have a prompt library, right? So one set of employees, they've put together prompts, and then they've tested this model, and then with the data that they have, right, for a particular use case. But unless you really, put them in a library, the prompts in a library, and then let's say next month, then you want to test out a different model, right? Something new, the new shiny object came around. If you have not established a process, have not taken a programmatic approach and established a process where you store these prompts in a library, right? Then you'll be recreating the entire stuff with a new model again, right? But instead, you said, hey, we'll take a systematic approach. These are the prompts for these use cases that we need, and then implement that method, and then you got some answers, and then they're right or wrong, your project failed or whatever, and then next time you could take the same prompt, you don't have to recreate them, so you have saved reuse of the prompts, right? Going back to the ROI discussion, right? Mm-hmm. All you do is you either replace the models or you add the models to the model library, and then now you point through an API approach that you have taken to the new models, and then you have the answers.
It makes sense, and I think when you're hitting a couple of things with this approach too, which is one is the reusability from an ROI standpoint, flexibility. I think as new technology comes in, how do you adapt? It prevents that vendor lock-in, and like right now is the time you don't want vendor lock-in, right? Because there's new technology that's coming every single day. You brought it up earlier, chatbots, right? And ChatGPT, everyone's familiar with that. I think that's probably the most, common thing that people associate with GenAI. But because of that, I think there is a lot of shadow AI out there, right, throughout the organizations. Does a platform approach help with shadow AI? How should companies think about shadow AI and how to manage that so that you move to away from this spaghetti AI to more of an enterprise approach that allows you to get reusability, prevent vendor lock-in, have that flexibility? How should they think about, moving away from shadow AI or managing shadow AI in like a holistic approach?
Yeah, actually, I brought up that point before. So let me just. So I came across this word shadow AI, and initially I said, "What is this?" Right? So essentially, so which is that people in organizations, they don't wait for the organization to tell them what they should do. So they went ahead and then implemented a small AI project for them, for their own organization, right? So, so that is how this the shadow AI thing came around. So can you stop it? No organization can stop, but as a result of this, another challenge came into, if you are feeding your enterprise's data into the generic, the chat gpts of the world. So then what's happening, so now you're exposing, which could be a proprietary data that you have, only your company should have access to. Now you're feeding into the large llms and chat gpt, and then enabling them to learn your own proprietary secrets, kind of a thing, right? So but that is where you have to put some guardrails, right? The access to the data is what you can control as an organization, but not access to chat gpt, right? So what you feed in, what data you feed into the prompt is a prompt, it's coming from a user, right? So you cannot, but the access to your enterprise data is where you put limits, and then which of that you can expose or not expose is the one that I think you should put controls.
Great, thanks. Any other thoughts, Grant?
I mean, I think Ramesh pretty much nailed it. I don't think you can, calling it shadow AI, makes it sound like we should fear it and it's moving in the dark, right? So it doesn't seem like it has a good connotation with it. So I couldn't agree more that the best thing you can do is protect your corporate data. Because that's where we've seen things in the media around misuse of corporate data intersecting with AI solutions where they shouldn't have been used. Otherwise, if on the other opposite end of the spectrum, if you have the tools in your company and you're making that available, then I would certainly hope that when it's not a programmatic delivery like I was talking about before and becomes more decentralized, then that becomes organizations scaling Gen AI. That's no longer shadow AI, right? So that's kind of how I would distinguish kind of when scaling and use across all these departments and operating independently is good versus what we've heard about and seen in the news around where when that can go terribly wrong.
Yeah, no, I think you bring up a good point. There's a balance. I mean, companies are different stages, and it's really about having kind of an approach that's going to work for where you are. But it's also interesting. You kind of alluded to the things that are in the news, right? Which is all around, should I trust AI, right? Mm-hmm. Like, is trustworthy AI? So there's a lot of confusion in the market and what to your point, Ramesh. Is the model going to eat my data and train itself on it? Will it not? What is safe? What is not safe? How should organizations think about AI from a rollout standpoint? How do organizations think about that change management where they have, team members in their enterprise that are, apprehensive about AI or concerned about AI? How do you deal with expectations management? Because as Grant said, AI is not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve everything. Right. And for an organization that's investing in AI, the last thing that they want is to have the internal pushback where they can't get that success because they don't have that buy-in, or expectations are wrong, or it's not, rolled out in the proper way. How do they manage expectation and change management?
So I think this is where I know I don't want to use another buzzword here. Explainability AI comes into picture, and the actually I would start with a very naive way of how do we trust each other, right? So as people, we trust each other if we have transparency, right? And then we are transparent to each other, and then we don't have an agenda, a hidden agenda that what I'm saying you don't know, and then things like that, right? So here in this case it's no different, right? So having the transparency about the models, being able to explain how a model is making decisions, and then what data is it trained on, right? Having the transparency is very important. And then second one is be able to explain how it's making decisions. So that's why it's important, especially for enterprises who can really do it, is having a custom solution. Because if you take a large language model, a generic model, and then try to force fit your requirements into that, and then try to get answers, you cannot explain, because you don't know what data is trained on and how the model is. The vendor has to explain to us, but of course, so explain how it's making decisions, and there are limitations on the transparency and explainability, and even in traceability, right? So that is the foundation for trust, right? So if that is not there, you can only trust it as much as you can trust the vendor who's providing solution. Right. So, and especially to your management, I think, to answer your question, Brett, which is that how do you establish trust, is that having that transparency and explainability aspect of it, how it's making decisions, and what are the boundaries under which it's making, what are the, let's say if a particular use case has ethics aspect to it. Like, for example, if you're a mortgage lender and then you are making decisions on who is getting the loans and who is not getting the loans, and if you're unable to explain that, then obviously then you cannot enforce trust in that particular model. So those are the two things that I would keep emphasizing, that the transparency and explainability.
I think those are foundations for trust. So I think like trust with anything, it needs to be developed, it needs to be built. It's not something you can just ask for and it happens. How do I trust that when I send an email that it's going to reach the destination recipient, right? I trust that because I've used email for a long time and I know how it works, right? And I know what happens if the recipient's out of office, or I had a typo and it's the wrong email address, right? I know the expected result. So I think we're in a warm-up period with generative AI, and people are still getting used to it. They're still learning to trust it. I've met plenty of skeptics, and I think most skepticism is rooted around either hype or false promises, rather than how do you help me do my job better, or how do we collectively get better outcomes. So I think when it comes to rolling out generative AI, for those organizations that don't want to dive in the deep end, certainly the first toe in the water is some form of a co-pilot. And when I say that, I don't mean Microsoft Copilot. I mean where the generative AI is augmenting our day-to-day job, our regular behaviors, by providing maybe information faster, or providing the insights that we need to help avoid some type of manual work. So benefiting the people that are doing the job, and having them see the result, and being able for them to manually evaluate and judge it themselves in terms of what do they decide to trust and use or not. And when they get that information, to Ramesh's point, do we have explainability? Do we have lineage on the content and these recommendations or these insights that were generated? So I think as long as there's that transparency and that traceability, that getting these solutions in front of end users, where they can still make decisions and override and maintain control, I think that's the best way to really adopt those first use cases.
No, that's great. Thanks, Grant. We covered a lot here today. Hopefully it's been helpful for everyone. Grant, any kind of closing thoughts we've covered today, or any advice for the audience?
Yeah, maybe just a reminder that I mentioned there's a few different articles that we published recently. You can find those, I believe, on the summary for the webinar here today. And then also, if you're looking for them later, you can find them on our website, becomposable.com.
Thanks. Ramesh, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I think we are at a stage where the last 2 years have given us, so lots of opportunities for us to experiment, and then actually, and quite a few companies have actually taken into production with the AI, right? So having given that, but we are still in a stage where lots of advancements are happening on a daily basis. So how do, if I'm an enterprise, if a company, so how do I deal with all this stuff, right? So it's a proven, best practice of start with a use case, right? So define your strategy, what you want to accomplish. Of course, we're not talking about that one, but once there, so identify the use cases, and then implement your solutions in a very process driven and programmatic approach, as opposed to one off I just want to be deploy and be done with it kind of methodology, right? It's because you definitely, it's the AI is here, it is not going anywhere. So given that, so you want to put the practices that you could reuse, lay the foundation, and then as the models are coming, what's the API probably is the best approach to deal with the models and focus on your data, right? So make sure your data is ready to take advantage of those things. So so that's probably the best way to go about implementing AI.
And maybe just to chime in on top of what Ramesh said, everyone needs to start with their use cases. For anyone that needs assistance working through those use cases, we do offer a 1-hour consultative workshop for free that you can sign up for and register on our website. And then we also do offer a free trial of our platform in order for building and ideating and deploying these solutions at scale.
No, that's great. So just to kind of in summary, I think like what we heard here, that real key here is having that platform approach that provides that flexibility, that reusability, that really changes the conversation around how you calculate ROI. Things also takeaways for me is that AI is not going to solve everything, right? There's going to be different parts of the solution, whether it's, business processes, just regular software code. The other part too is just to get started, right? I think we both hit that, which is start with the use case. I think it was recent IDC research that back in July that said everyone is over-focused on models, right? It's not about the model, it's about the use case, and really getting started, pick a platform, and I think that there's a huge opportunity ahead, and we're just only beginning now. So big thanks to Ramesh Dontha and Grant Spradlin for joining us here today. It was a great conversation. And just a reminder to the audience to the number of resources available in terms of white papers on the BrightTalk website. And with that, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Brett. Thanks, Ramesh.
Thank you.